Hi, I'm Gary Streigler. Recently I made a trip to visit one of my cousins, and when I got there I realized that about 6 of his doors weren't working very well, and so instead of sitting around, I can't hardly sit still, I got to work trying to help fix those doors. And it made me realize that over my 50 years or so of experience as a carpenter, there's a lot of little tricks that I've learned to help get doors working better, and so I decided, man, I need to share as much of that as I can in a video. I'm suspecting this is going to be a 2-part series. We might make it one big long one, but I'm thinking it's going to be 2. So, what are probably the most common, and I'm talking about interior doors right now, by the way, things. A lot of times, for instance, the doorknob not catching. When you close it, it doesn't catch. Another big problem, sometimes there are doors that you open them and they start to creep closed, or if you don't get them latched, they start to automatically open. We're going to talk about, how to hopefully remedy that. A lot of times doors are going to be dragging at the top or at the bottom, and that's also kind of a symptom of a problem there. And that's probably the most common, is they're dragging on one edge or the other. Anyway, I may think of some more as I'm going along, but I'm just going to dive right into it. Now, one of the other problems, didn't take me long to think of another one, did it? Sometimes you'll see doors that as you try and push them closed, they push back, and that's because something's binding. The door should just close like that. Also, you don't want the door to rattle. You shouldn't have a whole bunch of play in it when it's closed. We're going to try and address all of those in this series, and maybe a few other things I'll think about. Anyway, this door is in pretty good shape. I want to mention, obviously, this is kind of a set that I built for a magazine article that I'm writing, so it's not in somebody's house. This is just in my shop, but I thought, I can show anything I want to here. All right. This door right now is in pretty good shape. It's got a nice reveal. That's the distance between the door and the jamb, up and down the side. It's even across the top, and there's an adequate gap all the way up and down here. So that's why part of the reasons this door is working very well. Often you'll find doors that when you look at them, there's a big gap here and it's dragging over here, and you got a bigger gap at the top. Well, what's happened there is the weight of the door over time has kind of pulled this hinge out. So probably the number one quickest fix for any of those things is just to take a long screw. Now, it is very important where you use the long screw. On this hinge, when it's in the wall, actually, I'm going to hold it kind of like it's supposed to be. If I try and put a long screw in right here, I'm not going to catch anything but sheetrock. That won't do you much good. So I need to be back here, which is the back part of this hinge. These are actually some bigger hinges here, but I'd want to be driving that screw back in here. Those only get me sheetrock, and that does you zero good. So want to get back in there. Now, in my experience, this door has been nailed in place with shims behind it, and it's pretty solid. When you get the trim nail on the other side of it. But if the hinge starts to come loose, because normally you're only using 3/4 inch screws, a lot of times that jamb is only white pine, they can start to work loose. And sometimes even swelling. The door taking on moisture can cause problems. But by running a screw through, usually just through that top, you can fix a lot of problems. I've got this hinge in my hand. Carpenters used to totally hang a door, route the hinges or mortise the hinges and everything. But that's not the case anymore. It's all done in pre-hung shops where they are just cranking those doors out as fast as possible. So sometimes what you find is, like on this, because I actually did hang this door myself, the hinge is flush with the face. Sometimes if that hinge has not been mortised out deep enough, it's out past here, and that can cause some problems. One of the other things that can really get you in trouble is if these screws aren't put in straight. If you have that screw and the one across from are kind of set at an angle, and that, I can maybe show it here, you know, this screw, and by the way, when you put a long screw in, make sure you get one that's going to, you know, sit flush with that hinge. If that screw's at an angle like that, and the one here is too, when it tries to close, those screws are going to hit each other, and it's called that's going to cause it to bind up. So check for that. Check to make sure that the hinges are put in, you know, deep enough to be flush. Every now and then you may find a hinge that's actually in too deep. You know, that you'd have maybe too much gap here or something, or if the hinge is even too deep, that can cause it to bind up, because if both those hinges are too deep, you don't have that little gap there, so when the door closes, it tends to bind up. In that case, you put a little shim behind the hinge. The more times that you pull those screws out, though, the more likely they're going to get worked loose. So be careful when you're taking screws in and out. You know, if you're using an impact or a drill, be really careful. You know, if you run that screw in and it stops, and then you let it run about 6 or more times, you kind of strip that hinge screw out. So you want to be careful not to do that. You may want to take them out just super slow or by hand. At any rate, you can put even a piece of cardboard, if you happen to buy hinges out of a box, or poster board can make a nice shim behind the hinge. The plastic laminate samples that they give away at the big box stores make a great shim if you need you know, a pretty good one, a pretty good thickness one. Anyway, that is a possibility. One of the other things that I have seen, if you look again over here, we've got a pretty nice reveal all the way down. I have seen instances where this jamb is kicked in and there's no gap at all down here at the bottom, or there's no gap up here at the top. So as that door tries to close, it starts hitting the top or bottom, and that's going to make it want to kind of spring. I have seen a lot of times on pre-hung doors where they actually got this header a little bit too short. In other words, if you're installing that door, by the time you get the reveal you need there, it's dragging over here. You have to be very, very careful if you find a situation like that. But what I do is take a block of wood and try and tap that over if it's a new door that I'm installing. Now, if you're working like it was at my cousin's house on a door that's been in place and they've really, for instance, caulked everything really nicely, that caulk can be very, very challenging. What you may need to do in that instance is take a multi-tool like this. If they've caulked all those joints, you may have to take a multi-tool and cut that caulk joint, and even the caulk joint down here a little bit, because I mean, the really good caulk is almost like glue, and you can get something to break. But a lot of times you can maybe get things to move a little bit. Another tip, if you're concerned, about putting nails and things here, and by the way, it's the same thing when you're doing anything to move this over. This first half an inch, or you're going to hit sheetrock, so you don't want to put a nail there. You want to be back in here. I have seen instances, almost all of the door stop on any door that you're going to find has just been applied, so that if you wanted to hide a long screw behind the door stop, you could pop the door stop off. If you put it back with headless pins, it's going to work pretty well. Again, if it's been caulked, you got to cut all that caulk out. But you can recaulk if, most of the time. If the door's been painted white, you can get either an almond caulk or a white caulk and caulk it back, and nobody's going to really notice. They're going to be much happier that the door is actually working now. In an extreme example, this is a clamp that can be used to push or pull. And now, I'm not going to do it, but you would want to put a little piece of wood pad here and here. But you can put this clamp up there and swing it around. And you start tightening that. You can gently move that, and that might even be a better plan than just taking a block of wood and pounding on it. One of the other places that I've seen that can cause problems with doors, sometimes this door stop's not put on right. And if it's bowed a little bit, or maybe it's swelled up a little bit, as you close the door, this face will start rubbing right there. And that can cause a problem. And especially whether it's a stained door or a painted door, you can look at the door, and if it's painted, you say, oh, that's been rubbing right there. Or, it's been rubbing right here on this edge. You can see where the problem is and what to fix. If the stop happens to be hitting, you might have to cut the caulk, depending on how good a job the painter did, and take a block of wood and move it a little bit, and then re-nail it with a headless pinner, and it's almost impossible to see. Something that just came through my mind that I want to make absolutely sure that I share. I'm going to guess that at least in half of the doors in houses in the United States, the painter did not seal the top or the bottom of the door, and that lets moisture in. If you have a new house or you installed a new door and it warped, and you called the whoever you bought the door from, they came out and looked at it. A lot of times they have a little mirror on an extendable wand, and they go, you didn't prime the top of your door. Your warranty is void. Same thing with the bottom. So, for instance, if you ever have to trim the bottom of a door, maybe you had vinyl flooring and you decided to put in hardwood, now the door's got to be trimmed, make sure that you prime that back with something so it's not sucking in moisture. That's especially bad in basements, because basements tend to have higher humidity.